I am the Director of STEM Workforce Partnerships at the University City Science Center. As mentioned, this is What's the Next Move? Our discussions really are focused on workforce development and what's coming up next, talking with companies, organizations, and the like about what's the next move. This is the third iteration of our workforce series, and I'm really excited to have with us Sarah Robbins, who I've known for a couple years, but specifically is the, let me pull it up, Senior Manager of Youth Partnerships at District 1199C Training and Upgrading Fund. Like I mentioned, I've known Sarah for maybe 5 or 6 years now, and of the folks that I know who are very specifically youth engaged, youth intended, youth focused, youth oriented, focused on making sure things get to youth, Sarah is at least one of those top 5 folks that I know. And from all the standpoint of STEM organizations and STEM concepts and just providing training for youth, Sarah is definitely at the very top of the list. So I'm really excited to welcome Sarah to our session. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Phil. And hi, everyone in this group. It's an intimate group, but it's nice to see everybody.
Yeah. So I have a set of questions for Sarah. If we get towards the end, I definitely want to have folks ask questions to Sarah if they have them. Definitely feel free to unmute yourself to ask those questions. You can also put them in the chat. But because we have such an intimate group, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions that way, that's perfectly permissible. So my first question, just right out the gate, and this question is for Sarah. Tell us about yourself and kind of what brought you to the role that you're in now, and tell us a little bit about District 1199C.
Okay, so I'm from Philly, born and raised, and I started out in education. So I taught for 6 years, and I kind of went into education, not directly. I went to undergrad for something else and then did an internship with Brooklyn International High School and realized that I loved the classroom. And so I transitioned then into teaching in Philadelphia, taught for 6 years. And I think my framework for teaching is just consistent in why I do the work I do and what is what I feel are urgent needs today, tomorrow, in our society, which is really creating wonderful learning environments for our young people that are nurturing and loving. And so, yeah, we did a lot of interdisciplinary work. I taught for 2 years at People for People Charter School, and then I transitioned to Sankofa Charter School, which is actually an African-centered charter school. And so it's very values-based education, but we worked really hard to create learning modules that were student-driven and student-led. And so they had a lot of opportunities for leadership, but there was also a lot of cross-curricular elements. And so I worked primarily with elementary and middle schoolers there, but there was also an element, it's based off of the Freedom School model. And so a large part of it is also making sure that you have intergenerational work happening, intergenerational mentorship happening. And so that's also always been a grounding framework for what I believe is a really strong learning community. That said, community is a good segue. I began coordinating summer programs at District 1199C one summer, and that was the same summer that the following fall, they needed to hire a coordinator for their GED, what was then their GED to college program for 21 to 24-year-olds. So I stayed on in that role, which was consistent with a lot of the work that I had been doing outside of the classroom as well. So I had been getting my master's in education at that point, and was really focusing on zero tolerance policies and the criminalization of Black and Brown students in our school systems. And so, I think one of the things that I've seen just throughout life, and then also, in additional layers in the classroom, was just the deep and just kind of all-encompassing impacts that the prison industrial complex has on our young people. And so, you know, as somebody who has felt the impacts in my personal life, and then seeing, you know, young people really trying to navigate spaces where they have a parent incarcerated, that was really huge. And so the transition then to working with the GED to college program, you know, where we would do interviews with every student, you know, coming in, and still do, but it's an interview really just to get to know the young person. And everyone had stories that really had layers of trauma, and specifically educational trauma. And so, you know, we create schools, you know, well, we want our schools to really nurture our young people and inspire them and help them grow. And then, you know, we have so many instances of our young people being actively pushed out of those schools, right? Or just not supported at key moments, where if they were at a Lower Merion, or they were at, you know, a private school, that they would have immediately had the support that they deserved. And instead, they actually were faced with quite the opposite of support. So that said, beginning to work with the GED program at 1199C, it was kind of a natural transition, and it was something that was really just purposeful and needed. And so one of the things that we did, you know, and that had been kind of a consistent component of the program, was also making sure that we were integrating cross-curricular components and life skills, and you know, the arts, and really just kind of making sure that we had student leadership and self-expression built in, so that students were able to really own their process. Okay, I'm going to transition into 1199C because I know we're kind of limited time. This is the first.
You're good, Sarah. Go ahead, keep going.
So with that, District 1199C is a social justice organization. And I don't think that's usually necessarily how we are presented, or, you know, how we even introduce ourselves up front. But District 1199C is the Healthcare and Hospital Workers Union, and then the Training and Upgrading Fund is the education arm. And so we're an organization that at its roots is grounded in creating opportunities and career pathways for our communities and community members who are consistently disenfranchised, or kept from opportunities and access. And so at our founding, we started as, you know, a few, you know, organizing members around a card table in someone's basement, creating, really like mobilizing to say, okay, how can we create these training programs for our union members to grow and to move up? And then, you know, what does that mean in terms of an agreement with employers, and how do we really, you know, build that? So in terms of our organization, we're a nonprofit, but we are not a typical nonprofit. So we're also a Taft-Hartley fund, which, you know, means we also have this other realm of federal legislations and obligations, because we have about, it's about half and half, but we also have member-based programs that are funded through employers. So we have some terrific employer partners who pay, you know, a portion of overall salaries to make sure that their members can have the services that the training fund provides. And so we have a variety of different pathways. We have an LPN program that is one of our longest standing programs, and that's also now accredited, so folks can get tuition reimbursement. Well, I'm sorry, union members are eligible for tuition reimbursement every year, but then, you know, they're also able to get, individuals are able to get financial aid for the LPN program now. So we have the LPN program. We have CNA programs, and so that's one that is our longest standing youth program. The CNA program is right now funded through Philadelphia Works, and we owe a funding. We have, you know, depending on the time frame, we also create any rendition of these programs that I'm kind of walking through for either, you know, partners who might need it, or if there is a specific grant for, you know, that can support a given population or community to access the training. So we have our CNA programming. We have behavioral health training. And so within that spectrum, we have, you know, the direct support professional. We have training for current professionals to get certified in addressing the opioid crisis. And I'm sorry, right now, the program's specific name is escaping me. But that our behavioral health programs are also in partnership with Jefferson University. And so it's through that we have an agreement where if students, you know, pass through our certificate programs, they can go on and continue their education towards a bachelor's at Jefferson in behavioral health. Okay, we also have our early childhood development programs, which have really grown over the last few years. And that's been a large part of our apprenticeship work as well. Right now, we have really been working over this last about a year or so to build out our healthcare apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship opportunities. And so a colleague of mine, Mark Kartz, he has been leading the DSP pre-apprenticeship, which is for opportunity youth for young people. And he's been doing tremendous work in that vein. And so I've been working with him this year to really look at how we can build out more pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship opportunities and just broaden the pathways into existing ones as well. So I'm going to use that point to pivot just a little bit because I think as an organization, apprenticeships is really kind of a, I don't know if galvanizing is the word, but it's a new focus that we've had really since about 2014. We've had apprenticeships throughout our existence, but you know, in 2014 is when we really kind of started to go through these, you know, registered apprenticeship routes and really, you know, hone in on this as a real need in the workforce space to make sure that as we're doing this work, it's equitable. And it's really grounded in strong partnerships with employers. And so on that note, you know, as an organization, there are certain like core components of our work. One of them is just that acknowledgement that we need wraparound supports, right? Wraparound supports, the mentorship, the you know, social capital, like really being able to create opportunities for individuals to learn and grow in learning communities is essential. And so with that, like these core components that are embedded in apprenticeship are really the things that we want to do in all of our programs and in all of our work. It's not all necessarily funded, which is sometimes a difficulty because we have to figure out how to like patchwork things together or see who can fill in where. But, you know, making sure that, you know, folks have this kind of supported pathway into careers where, you know, they have upfront training, they have hands-on experience, they have engagement with employers early on where they're able to ask questions and learn about challenges in that workspace and you know, visit or do job shadowing, getting all of those experiences on the front end, and then move into a space of when they start work, knowing that they have someone who is a guide, a mentor, who's not really their direct supervisor, right? They don't have to, worry about what they say. They can be honest about the challenges that they're having. That's another essential part. And then that we're also working with the employer, consistently and in a much more in-depth way so that they can inform our training, so that we, really are looking at the curriculum and saying, okay, if this curriculum doesn't work for the workplace, then what are we doing, right? So making sure that in those early parts of the conversation that we're building with the employers at the table who want to be a part of it, so we can really identify the needs and help address those moving forward.
That's awesome. The next question I did have, with all the challenges that's happening currently, you've mentioned some of the challenges that's come up for the organization, sometimes challenges with employers, potentially challenges with youth as well. What current challenges is District 1199C facing from the start of the pandemic until now?
Oh, so many. I think and it's this whole virtual environment where you're on calls with so many partnering organizations and, folks who are navigating some of the same challenges consistently and brainstorming together and, strategizing together. It's clear that this is a very hard time. And because, we're a little bit more longstanding, I think we've been able to navigate some of the challenges a little bit, differently, or we haven't necessarily been as hard hit in some areas. I think our biggest challenges, first I'll say, is just the transition to remote learning and working. We, are an organization and we have so many internal jokes about this and, it comes up again and again, but we have so many ways that, we're kind of that saying about, fixing the plane while flying it, or fixing the car, right? Like, we've kind of always been in this mode where we are like moving at, 80 miles an hour and we can't lose speed because we have so many people and programs that we're working with that are so important. But we want to continue to make sure that we are doing them the best we can, and that we're really like consistently retooling and re-strategizing and all of that. So with the shift to the remote world, I think just infrastructure wise, we had not had really the funds, time or resources to make sure that all of our programs were ready. And I think we had been doing that in various ways, but because for most of our grant funded work, and all of our youth programs are grant funded, they're not on the union side. For all of that grant funded work, we really, most of it is program based. And so I see Wes is on the call. We actually have, a couple foundations. The LEMFES Foundation was super generous and able to support this year for 3 years with some of our apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship building out. And so, I think that those foundations are the exception. And right now, really, West, the Philadelphia Foundation, there's certain organizations locally who I think are really, seeing the need for how training for training institutions, and the need for, support of the institution versus some of these programmatic funding models that then leave gaps as an organization, right? Because we could fund a specific program, but we're also, pinching in terms of, okay, what is the salary? But then, what are the requirements? Who's the person we want to fill this role? But yikes, can we, acknowledge the degree of work that they'll be doing a little bit more with this salary, right? And in the context of that, also knowing all of the needs, programmatically, whether, it's also going to cover the costs of materials, the costs of instructors, all of that benefits, everything together, that there doesn't leave room for a lot of nonprofits and organizations to really, build out the personnel that they would want to really support the work robustly. So I think that transition to remote learning, having already been in that position where a lot of our programs were pretty siloed, some programs were already had complete virtual curriculum, right? Where they weren't only using that, but they had it fully developed and were able to just build it out a little bit more, connect it with some live teaching components, and boom, they were ready to go. And then we had, and a lot of our youth programs were actually better situated for some of that. And then we have some of our programs, we also have a large adult literacy program. And so with that, we have a lot of, low literacy level learners who, technology was a hurdle. And so I think, it was a blessing early on that we had a partnership with Tech Impact, and we're able to get, a whole bunch of Google Chromebooks donated, and we're able to give those out to, all of our students who needed them. But that was certainly an initial hurdle and a consistent one. I think now, one of the programs that I manage is our STEAM Scholars program. And that was initially funded through HHS. And that's actually how we first met. Phil, you were bringing in all these STEM professionals. It was great. We had all these rotating career workshops. And so with the STEAM Scholars program, that was a 5-year HHS grant. The current administration, I don't think it's going to come as any surprise, but has, not decided to refund the project overall. That was going to 27 grantees, and it was actually a partnership with Office of Minority Health, under the Obama administration to really build diversity in STEM and healthcare professions. And so that specific grant funding is not continued. So we have been trying to look at, okay, what other resources can we bring together to make sure the STEAM Scholars program can continue with partners, at Roxborough, Christy Shuda Guire, I see you're on, and she's on the OAC for Roxborough's biotech program. And so we worked with them over the last 5 years, on the STEAM Scholars, but, it's really riding right now on, okay, how can we kind of like piece together these different resources? And so this year we got the grant from DHS and OST for after school programming to continue to start a STEAM Scholars program at Vaux High School, and Stepping Stone Scholars received that same grant for Roxborough. So we partnered with them to make sure that we can maintain, continue STEAM Scholars in some capacity. But again, that's a 2-year grant. It's much less than the HHS grant was. So we were doing, simulation lab trips to Drexel's Medical College every year, 3 times a year. There was a scaffolded curriculum where students had done, the students we started with in 9th grade, by 12th grade, they had done everything from some basic ophthalmology to, scenarios with child abuse and gun violence. We had done a zombie apocalypse to talk about public health. They had gone into the cadaver lab several times and worked with the medical students there. They had done some really, awesome things over those years. And so right now it's really, how can we piece together what's needed there to continue that work? So that's a challenge where, when we look at the shutdown and the shutdown of schools, that our work in schools, while it wasn't halted because we continued to build virtual curriculum, a large part of the STEAM Scholars approach and program was also this creating this safe, innovative space in the school, and figuring out how we can continue to grow that and build opportunities for engagement there, work with teachers on cross-curricular projects, all of those different, just take the reins on trips in a lot of ways, do, college trips, all of those things. So I think that, there have been kind of several challenges to this, making the switch to remote learning in terms of like engagement, certainly. And also knowing that realistically, life is very hard right now. You know, that this is some very, you know, the layers of just trauma that folks are experiencing are real. One of the things that we, you know, developed an initial proposal for, and we were kind of stretched all over the place, but we're going to continue looking for how to kind of anchor this component, because we see it as a real need, is developing curriculum and workshops and in partnership with Department of Behavioral Health, that's really kind of looking at the trauma that our healthcare workers are experiencing right now, and building curriculum that won't just be kind of a common thread through all of our 1199C programming, because we want to make sure that it's embedded in all of our programming, but something that we can also bring directly to employer sites, and that is of use for them and their workers. Because we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's going to be a lot of PTSD that is, you know, just in the works right now. And now, you know, with the killing of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, on top of kind of this long history, you know, we just have layers of complicated dynamics and trauma that we need to make sure that we're addressing in all of the work that we do as well.
So I feel like we can have this conversation for another 4 hours, but we only have 6 minutes left. I do want to ask one more question and open it up to the rest of the folks that's on the call if they have questions for Sarah. You mentioned a number of things. One of the things you mentioned, partnerships, collaboration seems to be a word that was thrown out kind of like during, not thrown out in a negative way, but just thrown out in general before the pandemic. I'm personally, both personally and professionally, hearing more of that word collaboration. We need to collaborate. Two general, like, small questions is what does that mean for District 1199C and maybe like one or two of your programs? And then in general, like what does collaboration look like moving forward for District 1199C?
Yeah, that is, so I think for us, collaborations are like very much at the center of all that we do. They're absolutely necessary. And I think, you know, prior to the shutdown, it was interesting because, at least for me and the work within youth spaces in the city and nationally, you know, we were in several groups that, you know, originated from, you know, maybe wanting to like go after a specific funder together, right? For something very, you know, very specific, but it was, you know, a group of us that had consistently worked together over the years and said, okay, here's a gap. How can we, you know, develop a proposal or work together to address this collectively? And it's interesting because several of those groups either, you know, merged or, you know, kind of overlapped in certain ways. There was also, there was a group citywide that was getting together to look at our career pathways for young people and looking at how to support a collective proposal actually to LendFest. And from that, it was interesting at one of the early, actually, I think it was the first meeting that we had, and it was a day-long meeting. The Office of Workforce Development, which is now disbanded, but they helped lead a large portion of that. And by the end of the day, the conclusion that we all came to was, okay, regardless of whether we are getting this funding now, are we all agreeing that we want to continue working together on this, to develop this and continue to seek funding and pool funding to make sure that we are addressing this employment gap for youth collectively and coordinating better? And it was, vibrant yes. And so I think with that, one of the things that we're consistently working towards is like deepening our collaborations and partnerships, because it's one thing to just, do something together partner on, a workshop, do a panel, right? But it's very different to say, okay, we are committing to employing young people together. The folks who are, partners on our DSP pre-apprenticeship program, there's several of them now who are other youth-facing organizations, and we are using our direct support professional pre-apprenticeship also as a pilot for a youth development practitioner apprenticeship. So we actually hired our first apprentice at 1199C in this role, who came from our DSP program, and he is now in the role of youth support specialist. And he's developed this whole framework for a youth advisory board that he's rolling out. He'll be incentivizing, leadership roles for some of our young people across programs. And then Jevs is participating. They have an apprentice. We have, Power Core with apprentice. But all of those employers are also then coming to an engagement session early on, a roundtable with the new pre-apprentices to discuss their own personal paths as, leaders in whatever, right? And talk about their challenges and barriers, and hear from the young people about their experiences and their passions and why they want to enter behavioral health, right? And so they're participating in the roundtable, they're participating in curriculum development, and looking at, how to, especially actually in this virtual environment, they've been really pivotal in, helping us to think creatively about how to really continue to keep curriculum rich and engaging, and so yeah, I think that in terms of collaborations and partnership, the biggest thing is having, the kind of understood shared commitment to an end goal that is larger than some transactional value. It's not just, you're an employer partner, so you have these jobs to fill, we give you people. No, it's, are you paying your people fair wages? Are you treating them well? And if it's not a good environment, are you willing to have us work with you to support it being a healthier environment? Or are there, challenges that we're able to support and work on?
Gotcha. So Sarah, we are at time, but I do want to ask the question, if folks on the call want to get in contact with you to have further conversations or learn a little bit more about District 1199C, how can they contact you?
So you can reach me by email, srobbins@1199ctraining.org. I just pulled up the chat and I did see Wes. I'm sorry, I missed the question about impact by the elimination of Office of Adult Education. So real quick, I would just say absolutely, yes, it's huge. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining the call. Sarah's rich with knowledge and experience, so apologies for not getting to the guest questions. One thing I will say is definitely reach out to Sarah. Thank you for participating in the third iteration of this, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And there's some 4 o'clock sessions in there. There's a podcast club. Put a link in there. Continue participating throughout the day. This was an amazing conversation, and it shouldn't stop. So please reach out to the participants if you have questions.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.